Vanished Skyjacker, The Mystery of D.B. Cooper. Chapter 1, The Mysterious Man. On a gray, drizzly afternoon, a middle-aged man with slick-back hair and sunglasses stepped into Portland International Airport. He looked as though he'd just come from a business meeting. Dark suit, black tie, and a pressed white shirt. With a calm demeanor, he paid for a one-way ticket to Seattle in cash, signing his name simply as Dan Cooper. To airport staff, he seemed like a typical businessman. No one suspected that within hours he would disappear into legend as D.B. Cooper. The man's cool confidence was notable from the start. He moved purposefully through the airport, blending in with the crowd. As Flight 305 prepared for takeoff, Florence Schaffner, one of the flight attendants, glanced over the passengers, her eyes lingering briefly on the man in 18C, who seemed deep in thought, looking out the window. Soon she'd be seated next to him in one of the most nerve-wracking conversations of her life. Chapter 2, A Note and a Bomb. Shortly after takeoff, Florence felt a tap on her arm. She turned to see the man in 18C holding a small folded note. With a polite but insistent tone, he motioned for her to read it. Florence slipped it into her pocket, planning to look at it later. But then he leaned in closer, speaking quietly so as not to alarm nearby passengers. "Miss," he said, "you'd better read that note. I have a bomb." A chill crept down her spine as she opened the note. The man gave her no time to process the fear. He opened his briefcase just a crack, and inside Florence saw wires, red cylinders, and what looked like a battery, enough to convince her that this wasn't a bluff. "Tell the pilot," he instructed her in a calm voice, "I want $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck ready in Seattle. No tricks." Florence's heart pounded, but something about his composed manner made her strangely at ease. She thought about the parachutes. Why would he need 4? And why would a skyjacker ask for parachutes at all when other hijackers usually demanded safe passage? Chapter 3, The Parachute Demand. Cooper's demand for 4 parachutes baffled both the crew and law enforcement. Usually a hijacker asked for just 1, if any at all. But by requesting 4, Cooper added a psychological twist. He wanted authorities to believe he might force hostages to jump with him, or that he might bring 1 or more crew members along. This ensured the FBI wouldn't try to sabotage the parachutes. It was brilliant and chillingly calculated. The crew followed his instructions without question. With all his demands relayed, Cooper seemed oddly courteous. He asked Florence to sit with him, even offering her a drink, though she declined. Florence noticed that Cooper was never visibly nervous. He was patient, almost detached, as if he had rehearsed every step. Perhaps he had studied hijacking cases, taking notes on what had worked and what hadn't. He kept Florence and the other attendants calm, avoiding any actions that might frighten passengers. Florence was stunned by his control, his calm assurance that everything was going according to plan. For a brief moment, she felt he was just another passenger, a polite, almost friendly stranger, save for the fact that he held an entire plane hostage. Chapter 4, The Ransom Arrives. As Flight 305 circled Seattle, Florence relayed updates from the cockpit. The FBI was complying with his demands. They had gathered $200,000 in marked $20 bills, carefully chosen to track him later, and 4 parachutes. They also had a fuel truck waiting. Passengers remained oblivious, assuming the circling was due to a simple delay. Flight attendants kept them calm, offering drinks and light conversation. Cooper blended in, calm and polite, though Florence could sense an intense focus in his gaze, as if mentally rehearsing the next steps. The plane landed in Seattle just after 5:01 p.m. True to his word, Cooper allowed all 36 passengers and 2 of the flight attendants to disembark. Florence remained behind with one of her colleagues in the flight crew, and the atmosphere shifted as the plane sat on the runway in the fading light. Once the ransom money and parachutes were brought on board, Florence noticed something curious. Cooper counted the money quickly but thoroughly, checking that it met his expectations. His demands and attention to detail were so specific, it was clear he had meticulously planned every aspect of the heist. Chapter 5, Into the Night. After the plane was refueled, Cooper gave the pilots specific flight instructions that struck them as bizarre. He wanted to fly low, at an altitude of 10,000 feet, with landing gear down, at the lowest speed possible without stalling. He also asked them to keep the cabin unpressurized, which was strange, as it would have made the interior cold and uncomfortable. But these adjustments would allow him to jump safely and avoid freezing temperatures at higher altitudes. Then came his final, and perhaps strangest instruction. He wanted the plane's rear air stair door to be lowered in flight. The air stair, a unique feature of the Boeing 727, was located at the rear of the plane and could be lowered while the plane was airborne. By using it as an exit, Cooper could jump without needing to clear the plane's body or wings. To Florence and the crew, it was now clear that Cooper had a detailed understanding of aviation, more so than most. Had he been a pilot, a paratrooper, or someone who'd studied the mechanics of airplanes? Whoever he was, he seemed well prepared. Around 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 took off again, now headed south, ostensibly bound for Mexico City. As darkness settled outside, Cooper became quieter, mentally preparing for what was to come. Florence and the crew followed his orders to stay in the cockpit. Chapter 6. The Leap into Legend. At around 8:02 p.m., the cockpit received an alert from the rear of the plane. The air stair had been deployed. Florence and the pilots braced themselves, unsure if they would hear a noise or feel the shift as Cooper leapt into the dark. But they heard nothing unusual, only silence. By the time Flight 305 touched down in Reno, Nevada, Cooper, along with the ransom money and the 4 parachutes, had vanished. The FBI and local authorities swarmed the aircraft, searching for evidence, but Cooper had left almost no trace. He'd planned everything down to the last detail and had disappeared without so much as a goodbye. Chapter 7. The Investigation and Theories. The FBI launched one of the most extensive manhunts in American history, combing the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest for any sign of Cooper. They focused their search around the area near Ariel, Washington, believing this was likely where he would have landed based on the flight path and estimated jump time. But the investigation quickly hit roadblocks. The landscape was harsh and expansive, full of towering evergreens, fast-moving rivers, and rugged terrain. Authorities didn't find a parachute, briefcase, clothing, or any sign of a body. Some agents suspected Cooper had perished in the jump. After all, his lack of experience with parachuting, if that was the case, and the extreme weather that night would have made survival difficult. But without physical evidence, they were left to speculate. The money trail also went cold. The FBI had carefully documented each of the ransom bills, hoping that Cooper would spend them and reveal his identity. They distributed the list to banks and retailers across the country, but the money never surfaced. Cooper, or whoever might have found him, never spent a cent. Over time, a series of suspects emerged, each with compelling motives or suspicious backgrounds. Some of the most intriguing include Richard Floyd McCoy, a former Green Beret who attempted a similar skyjacking later in 1972, demanding $500,000 and 4 parachutes. McCoy's knowledge of parachuting made him a prime suspect, but his alibi for November 24, 1971, ruled him out as Cooper. Kenneth Christensen, a former flight attendant for Northwest Orient who had been stationed in Seattle. His family claimed he had admitted to the crime on his deathbed, and some saw similarities in his background and physical appearance. But the FBI could find no concrete link. Robert Rackstraw, a Vietnam veteran and explosives expert who hinted at knowing Cooper's identity, then denied it. In later years, an amateur team argued that he was D.B. Cooper, but Rackstraw continued to deny it, and the FBI found no definitive proof. Chapter 8. The Tenna Bar Money. In February 1980, nearly a decade after D.B. Cooper's leap into legend, an unexpected discovery revived interest in the case. A young boy named Brian Ingram, vacationing with his family near the Columbia River at a sandy area called Tenna Bar, unearthed a bundle of decaying $20 bills. The cash, totaling $5,800, was badly weathered, but when the serial numbers were checked, they matched the ransom bills Cooper had taken with him that fateful night. This find set off a new wave of investigation and speculation. How had the money ended up there? Tenna Bar was roughly 20 miles southwest of the suspected jump area in Ariel, Washington, on a river path that didn't quite fit with the plane's route or the theorized landing zone. The location created several puzzles for investigators and theorists alike. One idea was that Cooper had lost or discarded some of the money during his jump. Perhaps, as he leaped or struggled to deploy his parachute, a portion of the cash slipped from his hands or bag. Others believed he might have buried part of the money as a decoy, intending to throw off investigators in case he was being pursued. Another theory was that the money, after Cooper's possible landing in the woods, found its way into a tributary that eventually carried it to the Columbia River. However, water flow experts analyzed the river's current patterns and were divided over whether the money could have floated such a distance naturally. The physical condition of the bills also left questions. Though severely degraded, they were still intact enough to make people doubt they'd been in the water the whole time. The money at Tina Bar added a strange twist to the case, but ultimately it answered none of the central mysteries. Beyond this, no other ransom money was ever found, and the bulk of Cooper's $200,000 remained unspent and untraceable. The discovery reinforced the mystery, confirming that at least part of the money made it out of the plane, but leaving the rest of Cooper's fate as obscure as ever. Chapter 9. Theories and Unlikely Connections. The search for D.B. Cooper's identity has been as mysterious and convoluted as the hijacking itself. Over the years, various private investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths have kept digging, determined to solve the case that the FBI had eventually closed. Some of the most popular theories have added layers of intrigue, painting Cooper as everything from a rogue soldier to a former airline employee with a grudge. The rogue soldier theory. Some investigators have speculated that Cooper was a former soldier or intelligence operative. His parachuting plan and demand for unpressurized cabin conditions suggested he had more than a passing familiarity with high-altitude jumps and survival tactics. His calm demeanor, coupled with his knowledge of the Boeing 727's unusual rear air stare, hinted at someone with military training or experience with aircraft. If Cooper was a former soldier, he might have seen the heist as a final act of defiance or even as a financial reward for services rendered. The airline employee theory. Others have proposed that Cooper could have been a disgruntled airline employee. Northwest Orient, the airline he hijacked, had recently laid off several workers, some of whom might have harbored resentment. By hijacking a plane from Northwest and making the airline pay a hefty ransom, Cooper could have been striking back in a way that would never trace back to him. This theory suggested an inside knowledge of airline operations and possibly even familiarity with how the ransom would be handled. A man of many identities. In the 2010s, a particularly intriguing theory pointed to Robert Rackstraw, a Vietnam veteran and a former paratrooper with a background in explosives. Rackstraw had a checkered past and was known to have hinted at connections to the hijacking in a series of mysterious messages. However, he alternately denied and then teased about his possible involvement, leading some to believe he was merely seeking attention. While his background fits some elements of the D.B. Cooper profile, the FBI ultimately ruled him out due to a lack of conclusive evidence. Confessions on deathbeds. Over the years, several people claimed that their fathers, uncles, or acquaintances had admitted to being D.B. Cooper on their deathbeds. One notable story came from Marla Cooper, who claimed that her uncle, Lynn Doyle Cooper, returned home the day after the hijacking with unexplained injuries. Marla recalled her family referring to him as DB, though she was young and didn't know the context at the time. While this confession seemed credible to some, it ultimately couldn't be substantiated. Chapter 10. The End of the Investigation. In July 2016, after 45 years, the FBI announced that it was officially closing the D.B. Cooper case. Despite years of effort, hundreds of suspects, and millions of dollars spent, the Bureau had run out of leads. The official statement explained that the FBI would redirect IST resources to other cases, but encouraged private investigators and the public to continue their pursuit. The FBI's statement sparked a mixture of disappointment and renewed enthusiasm among Cooper enthusiasts. To many, D.B. Cooper represented something more than a criminal. He had become a symbol of the daring individual, the man who outsmarted the system and disappeared into the wilderness. His story had transcended the crime itself, evolving into a folktale about the mysterious man who leapt into the unknown and beat the odds. Chapter 11. Legacy of a legend. Over the years, D.B. Cooper's heist has inspired a subculture of enthusiasts, from books and documentaries to fictional adaptations and online forums. The annual D.B. Cooper Days Festival, held in Ariel, Washington, draws people from all over, celebrating the mystery and the possibility that Cooper might have survived. Many view Cooper's case with a strange fondness. Unlike many criminals, he didn't harm anyone, instead displaying politeness and calmness that made him memorable. His seemingly victimless crime, especially in a turbulent era marked by distrust of authority, made him a symbol for those who imagined slipping past the rules and achieving freedom. Cooper's heist has also impacted aviation security forever. Following his disappearance, the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, implemented several changes, including mandatory metal detectors at airports and an update to Boeing 727s called the Cooper vane, a mechanism preventing the rear air stair from being opened mid-flight. The hijacking ultimately forced security protocols to evolve, permanently changing how airlines and airports approach safety. Epilogue: the mystery remains. To this day, the question of who D.B. Cooper was and whether he survived remains open. His figure lingers in the cultural imagination, a mixture of clever, criminal, and folk hero. The D.B. Cooper case is one of the few criminal mysteries that has grown richer with time, drawing in amateur sleuths and storytellers alike. Was Cooper a desperate man with nothing to lose, or a master planner who executed one of the boldest heists in history? Did he survive his jump into the cold, moonless night, or did he meet his end in the deep forests of the Pacific Northwest? The true story of D.B. Cooper may never be known, but one thing is certain: he lives on in the public consciousness, a symbol of mystery, daring, and the allure of the unknown. And as long as people are drawn to unsolved puzzles, the legend of D.B. Cooper will remain as mysterious as the man himself.